Welcome, welcome, welcome. My first question to you is, why are you here?
That's a question I asked my wife earlier. I thought I was a perfect parent already.
Yeah? Your response was that, yes, you're kind of wondering because you're a perfect parent or whatever it means, right? And there's an element of truth to that in the sense that there's a belief in society that the only reason you would go and learn something about parenting is because there must be something wrong, right? I mean, otherwise, why would you go? I mean, the world over, right? Parenting is the oldest job in the world, not because it's a fancy comment, but because, we all have offspring, and therefore, because human species have offspring, there's always going to be a parent, and therefore the role of parent is as old as the human race is, right? And that would imply that somehow there must be a natural process to parenting which, if you get wrong, well, there must be something wrong, and therefore that's the only reason why you go and get upskilled about something. And it's a big challenge out there, because usually the only people that go and find out how to do this thing called parenting any better is when you've got a problem with what's happening. And that's so not the case. That's such a disempowering space to come from, because by the end of these 7 weeks, you will have skill sets and awarenesses which will make your life as being a parent far easier than it possibly seemed before. We spend more formal time learning how to drive a car than being a parent. Now, the thing about being a parent is that by default, just because you have a child, you become a parent, right? And you would think, like I mentioned before, that there would be like a manual that would come with us that would say, well, when you're struggling with your child in these situations, let's turn to page 32. There it is. Great. Okay. And you kind of it's like a manual, right? I mean, any form of product that you get in the world today has some form of a manual, or at least a service center where you can phone up and say, listen, this actually isn't working anymore. You can't quite say, listen, how long was my what's it called? Your return policy? What was it? 1 year? Oh no. What about 1 year and 1 week? Is that okay? We don't have those, right? So we have this innate ability and wish to really do the best for our children. That, I believe, is innate and is part of our human instinct to look after our young. And even though they're older, that's still that term, our children. We want to look after that. That is innate, and I think very much so it is. And that drive is absolutely crucial, because ours would give up on them, after a few days or after a few years, whatever it is, where that stress starts really coming in. At the same time, just that drive is not enough. We need something else to really support us in making things easier. Getting our children to cooperate with us. And that, for me, is actually a lot of what parenting is. Cooperating comes in the form of getting the children up in the morning, dressed, getting them to eat, getting them to brush their teeth, getting them just into the car, getting them to stay at school, picking them up, trying to get them out of school, or trying to get them wherever they're going next, swimming or music or gymnastics, then getting home, then somehow managing to do whatever you have to do else in your life, plus then the bath time routines, maybe then story, etc., etc. And then it starts again the next day, if you haven't spent the whole night also trying to look after them, because comes to your bed in the middle of the night, calls you because they're afraid of something, start fighting with their siblings because the one's snoring and they happen to be in the same room. I mean, it's and you just think you've sorted one thing, and the next thing it all crumbles again the next day. Or you think that you found some way to resolve the little sibling rivalry that was going on, to find out the day later that actually they were just joking with you, and it's now like festered, and today it's now actually coming to breaking toys. And you're now paranoid that what's going to happen when they hit the teenage years. When what you're experiencing perhaps in the primary school years is like your preparation for what happens more in those teen years, when their individuality starts becoming more formal, they want to assert themselves, the peer pressure starts influencing, and you've just spent the last 12, 13 years nurturing them to then have their peers just come and bulldoze everything what you've tried to inculcate, right? They've spent all this time really looking after your children, hoping that you've instilled values that are going to last longer than your control over them. Because that's the thing about parenting. You start off, and this little infant is totally dependent on you for everything. Food, warmth, touch, everything. And as they grow older, so they become more independent. So you wish they would become more independent as well, right? Because you don't want to have to continuously be there every moment of every day to do everything for them. But there's that we call a bittersweet road. As you run the risk that if you overprotect, well, you're going to get bitten later on by overprotecting them, because then they can't be independent and do things on their own. But if you let them go too early, they're going to feel that you're abandoning them, which you'll probably have to pay in therapy a couple of years later, both for them and for you. Your guilt at abandoning them when you found out that that's not how you should be parenting. And of course, your child comes back to you later and says, well, Mom, I just want to let you know that I had a crap childhood because of some situation that you actually can't even remember. And you're like, oh, how did you even think that I didn't love you? Look what else I did for you. You're my daughter. And then they come up with some story of what they perceived was the reality for them. And, there's an ongoing maze of how we're going to make this work. And really what we're going to be looking at in the next 7 weeks are some skill sets that will really support you in that, and awarenesses that will allow you to see perhaps your role as a parent as a different role than is currently out there as a traditional role of parenting, and really to open up what we're wanting most for our children, which is their happiness and their well-being. And of course, with that, so is yours, because I think the greatest challenge of parents is to find that balance between your needs being met and their needs being met. And how do you do that without becoming authoritarian, even though you're the authority? Right? The authoritarian is like the command, it's the corporal, it's the do this, do that, because that's an authoritarian approach. And there's a style called the authoritarian style of parenting. At the same time, you are the authority. You have a role to look after your child, to bring them up, to put boundaries in place, to support them in understanding the world, to impart your values, because that's what you think, that's what is a gift you can give your children. But how do you do that in such a way when you've got this kind of free spirit who's running around, who just wants to play, who likes splashing in the bath, who doesn't actually mind splashing because who's going to clean up after them? Well, of course, Mom and Dad are going to clean up, so that's great, right? They just want to watch TV. They see the world through different eyes. They see it as, well, Dad, how come you can go and watch 2 DVDs and you tell me I can only watch 1? And then you tell me I have to go to sleep at 6 o'clock, but look, the sun's still up until 7:30, and you guys go to sleep whenever you want. Who tells you that and they come up with all the arguments. And how do we argue back? Well, we don't really know at times, because they have valid arguments, right? Especially as they get cleverer and cleverer. The primary years, the 8s and the 9s, and then obviously into the teenage years. Trust me, by the time they get to the teenage years, they're going to really be strong, because that's what we're also nurturing. We're growing up our children in this environment in our modern age with a real drive of individuality and uniqueness. It's a prominent value of our modern society. Whereas when I was brought up, it was kind of like you go to school, you become a number, you do what everyone else does, you just that's what happens. Whereas now we say, no, children have a right. They have a right to express themselves, the right to decide what should or shouldn't happen in their worlds. If they don't want to eat supper, well, actually that's okay. They're not hungry. Whereas before it was, you're going to sit here until you finish that plate. And you would sit there. Well, I had to sit there. The only payback was they forced my brother to eat pumpkin, and then he vomited all up, and they had to clean it up afterwards. But it's a fairly mediocre payback, right? I mean, what a disappointment. But now we're kind of saying, well, does it have to be that way? Do we have to hit our children the way maybe we were smacked? I mean, I was smacked a couple of times, and I'm very clear that my dad always did it out of a conscious choice, not out of a reaction. But I'd still like to think that there are other skill sets and other ways of disciplining that don't require that, but still achieve the same result. That's what I'm really looking at and wanting to spend my time in opening up is, can we find those skill sets? Can we find those techniques? Can we find those belief systems that support us in merging, in marrying both what we're wanting for our children, for them to be happy, for them to be empowered, for them to be fulfilled, and all the other things that we're needing. They need to get up, they need to get dressed, we just need to get through the day with our sanity intact. Otherwise, it's absolute mayhem every morning and every evening, and it doesn't serve anyone, right? That sense of flow, that's what it is commonly termed, and it's a word I'm going to use frequently, that sense of flow in the family home, where things just seem to go, it like happens. There's this natural way of the connections of the relationships, of the cooperation. It doesn't mean that they're not its ups and downs, but that flow is there, which we really want and aspire to. And everything we're going to be looking at in the next 7 weeks is around that flow, making sure that flow is strong, is in place, and you're creating it, not it just happening to you. Because what a disempowering space to come from, that you've got no control over what happens in your home or how to nurture your child. It just is going to happen. That's what I call the distinction between life happening to you and you happening to life. What I would like for my child is to be able to go into the world and happen to the world and happen to life, and not just feel that it's there, that's going to step them through the face and then that's it, pull them down on the ground with my child not getting up and saying, okay, thanks for that lesson, and this is what I'm going to carry on doing. That's what I'm really wanting. And that's going to happen because of you and the way that, and the environment that you really place within them or for them. And by the end of the 7 weeks, you'll really start realizing the role that you play is pivotal. You're the primary educators of your child, both in academics and in life. You have such a powerful relationship with them that you have the ability to either open them up or shut them down. In any given moment, you can dehumanize them or humanize them. You can create dignity or take it away. Whatever you do can be respectful or not. And the challenge is we're not necessarily trained, like I had mentioned before, and we're just going along, seeing how to make it work. So how about we have a journey where we go along and we have skills and awarenesses that help us make that the best journey we can, as opposed to often what happens with our grandparents. And I had a workshop just 2 weeks ago in Zimbabwe where some of the grandparents stood up and said, I wish I'd known this with my children. Because all they've got now is they can do it on their grandchildren, because their children are already of a certain age and gone, and they lament that. And that's something I don't want to have in my life, is look at my child at 3, at 6, at 10, at 12, at 18, 21 years old, and I want to be able to look them in the eye and say, I did everything I could to give you the best possible happiness and success in life. And even though I've messed up, that's okay, because that's part of the journey, right? We can't be perfect. And our children aren't wanting us to be perfect, but I want to be able to look them and confidently say, I really did the best I could to make that happen for you. So that when they get to, those 21st-year-old birthdays where they stand up from their change from the minor to the adult, when finally your child leaves the nest, maybe not the home, but any form of control you can have now, because they're now officially a major, an adult, I'd like for them to turn around to me, and when they're saying their thank you speech, and really say, what you've given me in being my father is a gift which is absolutely priceless. That's what I want to hear. I want to hear that what I've done has supported my child in being who they are, and they're proud of that. They want to be who they are, as opposed to wishing there could be some person out there who they continuously aspire to and starve to be, or, even sometimes change names to be, because that's what they think is going to make the difference. No, something inside is going to make that difference. And that you have every power to change. And even if we don't know how, as long as you have the belief that you can, well, then it's just a matter for us to go and search out the how. But if you believe you can't, well, then you're not even going to bother searching out the how. You're just going to give up. So for me, that distinction between the definition for me of an empowered person is the one believes they can and the other believes they can't. So an empowered person believes they can, a disempowered person believes they can't. Right? And it was Henry Ford who said, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, either way you're right. It's so frustrating. I mean, it's so simple, right? Whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, either way you're right, because that's how your world is going to flow out. So imagine a child who has that belief, I think I can, or I know I can even, and a child who says, I can't. Those two lives are going to be so diverse, because the one's always going to keep an action of doing something, of learning, of evolving, whereas the other one's just going to shut down and just have life happen to themselves. That's a belief. And we're going to look at what impacts our belief systems, because you are creating a belief system in your child. And that's what we want to create. And the challenge is that's also a belief system that you're going to have to see and scrutinize, is what are your belief systems about your children? Is it that you only start engaging them when they're a teenager because that's when you feel that you can connect? Or is it that you find that you can do that at a far younger age, etc., etc.? I mentioned the word empowered, and I just want to create a definition as well of how I use the word empowered. So for me, the definition of empowered is your ability to impact your environment. Your ability to impact your environment. And that's why it comes back to your belief. Because if you think that you can change what's going on around you, well, you'll be in action of changing it, right? You'll do some steps. Whether you actually change it or not at that moment is irrelevant, because you'll be in action of wanting to change it. And that's what empoweredness means. Someone who believes that they can't impact their environment is therefore going to have this belief that life's just going to happen to them, because it's not even worth trying to change whatever's happening. And of course, they're not going to do anything. So they're going to feel very disempowered. And it really comes down to that belief system. Regardless of what the results are, the belief that comes with it is so important. And that belief is an internal space for children and us as humans. And that's what we want to really nurture, which is why it's partly the nurturing of self-esteem, because how we esteem ourselves, how we value ourselves is going to show up in that belief, which will therefore show up in our actions. And we're going to look at that in just a wee moment. Now, that was a long speech after just your simple response of, well, you just asked that question. Why are you here? Because things are all, perfect parents.